Good evening and welcome to Estuary TV News. In tonight's show, we're going to be taking a look back over the week's news, and joining me in the studio is journalist and presenter Hugh Ridges. But first, here's James Dunn with the news headlines.
Hello. In the headlines today, if we want a better road route, we may have to pay for it, says Cleethorpes MP. And superfast broadband, finally coming to a street near you. Cleethorpes MP says toll roads could be the only option if the government wants to improve the road network between London and the Humber. Earlier this week, the government said it would consider extending the M11, which currently runs from London to Cambridge, all the way to the Humber Bridge, although it did not commit to the policy. But Conservative MP Martin Vickers, who sits on the government's Select Committee for Transport, said it was unlikely unless they can find private investment, which means toll roads. Mr Vickers said this may be the best option in order not to hinder the growing economy in the Humber region, but it may anger residents of southern Lincolnshire, as new roads would involve ploughing into virgin territory in rural areas.
Well, we've heard from a lot of potential investors that there is a lot of money available in pension funds and trust funds and the like around the world who are looking for investment options, and they're looking at roads in particularly in the more prosperous countries. So it's a way of getting additional funding into the network, and as long as there is always the option of a free road available to car owners, then I think that we shouldn't rule out the option of looking seriously at new extensions to the network that are tolled. It might not be a favourable option, but I think, being realistic, it's the only option that's going to be available to governments of whatever political colour over the next decade or so.
North East Lincolnshire Council is launching a public consultation on a borough-wide ban of drinking on the streets. The council has already approved the policy in principle, but the public will have the chance to have their say from March the 2nd before it's introduced. It followed public controversy over the number of people drinking and causing trouble in areas such as Freeman Street, and controlled drinking zones already exist in Grimsby Town Centre and Cleethorpes Marketplace. But council leader Chris Shaw says some people just stand outside them, leaving police powerless to stop public drinking.
Basically, we want the police to use their discretion in this and to use it as a tool in, like we say, a tool in the box. So if you're taking a bottle of wine and a picnic basket down to a local park to have a picnic, fine. If you're taking 48 cans of beer down there to get drunk and cause a problem, then you've got an issue, and we've got an issue with you.
The idea is supported by Police and Crime Commissioner Matthew Grove, should the public back it.
Lots of things are very difficult to police. I mean, let's be honest, the current proposal to ban smoking in cars where there's a child is almost impossible to police. That's not necessarily a reason not to introduce it. It does send a clear message. It's not just about what can practically and easily be policed. It's about sending out a clear message that certain behaviour is not right, not acceptable, and won't be tolerated.
East Riding Council has joined forces with British Cycling in a bid to encourage more residents to take to the saddle this summer. British Cycling is now on the hunt for new ride leaders in the area to help support beginners. They're urging enthusiasts to sign up to one of a number of free training courses to be held across the region. A centre in North East Lincolnshire which helps vulnerable and homeless people has secured more than £470,000 from the Big Lottery Fund. Harbour Place Day Centre was awarded the grant through the fund's Reaching Communities programme and says it will help at least 800 people get their lives back on track. It's one of 8 projects in Yorkshire and the Humber to share more than £2 million from the fund. Many areas in North Lincolnshire struggling with unworkable internet speeds will get access to super fast broadband between now and June next year. The project, funded by the European Regional Development Fund, aimed to increase the number of homes with access to high-speed internet to 90%. But it's hoped it will exceed that target, reaching 92% of households. North Lincolnshire will hold 10 public meetings across the borough between now and the end of March to talk about the opportunities that this will bring.
We've seen some fantastic news developments on the Humber Bank with Able UK coming into the area. We've seen a lot of more high technology companies want to relocate. So one of the big issues is, if you want more and more companies to relocate to this particular region, create prosperity and employment, is you've got to be digitally connected. And we're absolutely passionate about increasing super fast broadband speeds, and more importantly, allowing everybody to have access to that broadband.
That's all from me. We'll see you for the bulletin next time.
Tonight we'll be looking back over the week's news and the issues that have been raised. My guest is Hugh Riches. Hugh is a journalism lecturer at Grimsby Institute and presents Hot Topic, a political talk show here on Estuary TV. So Hugh, which stories have caught your eye this week?
One or two. The first one that I noticed was about education in the East Riding. Because of a reduction in the number of pupils coming through from primary schools, 615 fewer this year predicted than there were last year. That's going to lower the secondary school population, so there'll be much less money available for secondary school education, which means that some of these schools risk having to lose teachers, and they're going to be making them redundant.
And does it say the reasons behind that? Why are less pupils going to those schools in the East Riding?
Simply because the population's dropped. There must have been a few years back then, what, in the late 1990s, I guess now, when people weren't making as many babies as they have been. But they also say that by 2018, the population would have gone up again. That child population coming through from primary schools to secondary schools is expected to rise, at which point in, 4 years' time, if they've made all these teachers redundant, they're going to be short of teachers, presumably, and they're going to be perhaps asking those trained teachers who've been doing something else for a few years back. So it seems a little bit unfair to say to the teachers, sorry, we don't have enough children for you to teach. Come back in 4 years when the population's rising again, when the people of Yorkshire will have become a little more fertile, and twiddle your thumbs for 4 years.
Does it say anything about the funding that East Riding Council gets for schools?
Well, the funding is dependent on the number of pupils, and so the funding changes from year to year. And so, if the pupil number goes down, then there's a drastic cut in the amount of money they get. But again, as the pupils rise again, maybe there were a few colder winters in the early part of this century, then their funding should rise with it. But I suppose you can't pay people not to teach when there aren't the people there to teach, but equally it's very difficult to know what to do with teachers who you don't need, but you know you are going to need them again in 4 years' time.
Yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it?
It's a bit of a conundrum for them, yeah. Maybe there should be a rethink about flexibility and career changes in education.
Maybe. That's a conversation for another time.
Might well be, yes.
What else do we have?
The next thing is, again, north of the, well, no, for the whole of the Humberside region, some of the Hull members of Parliament, Alan Johnson, former Home Secretary included, who's now who has always been the MP for Hull West and Hessel, he's been talking about getting rid of the police and crime commissioners. Now, in 2012, for the first time all over the country, each police force region elected its own police and crime commissioner to replace the old police authority. So there was an elected single executive representative to oversee policing. This was a Conservative and Liberal coalition policy that the Labour Party never really approved of. And so this former Home Secretary, Labour MPs, Alan Johnson and Charles Clarke, another former Home Secretary, both saying that if Labour were to come back to power next time round, that they'd be abolishing the commissioners.
And Labour have been against this from the beginning, haven't they, really? There was a lot of uproar kind of when it was first introduced. So the stance hasn't changed, would you say?
Their claim is that it politicises policing, that if you have an elected official supervising police forces, that turns policing into a political issue. Yeah. Now, as the similarity of the words indicate, policing is a political issue. Although it might not necessarily be wise for it to be quite such a democratically, or quite so directly democratically political issue. Such is their argument, because the police should be entirely neutral of politics. Yeah. The Conservative argument is that democracy is good, and the way we police should have some sort of democratic accountability. Anyway, two former Home Secretaries under the previous Labour government calling for the abolition of the police and crime commissioners.
Right. Okay.
What's next? One of our favourite characters, a member of the European Parliament for Yorkshire and Humberside, formerly of UKIP, now an independent MEP. When UKIP kicked him out last year, Godfrey Bloom has been caught in controversy once again.
What's he done this time?
Well, I mean, it's so out of character, isn't it, for him? He's been standing up in the European Parliament and saying that he thinks that all government and taxation is organised theft. Okay. Which is perhaps a perfectly legitimate political point of view. It's part of the argument of politics that's been going on since John Locke, for 300 or 400 years. But he also, perhaps more unwisely, stood up and told the European parliamentarians that one day the people would rise, break into the building, and hang them all.
Oh,
this is perhaps intemperate language. The European Parliament is considering giving him an official reprimand for this. I don't quite know how painful or distressing an official reprimand from the European Parliament might be, but his 1-minute speech has earned taken a record number of hits on YouTube. So there's an audience for this sort of rhetoric. I don't know if it's an audience that's in agreement with it or an audience that just likes to be amused.
And what do you think about stories like this when they make the headlines? Do you think it takes away from the more serious issues, or do you think that sometimes it does have a point?
Well, I mean, this coverage of politics should be journalism is all about an impartial and objective weighing of well-reasoned arguments. On the other hand, it's also a little bit about personal drama and the occasional. I'm sure Mr. Bloom wouldn't object if I suggested that he might be occasionally an eccentric character. So it puts. I'm sure it outrages lots of people. Lots of marmalade splattered across the breakfast newspapers, but it's at best a laugh and at worst a waste of time.
Okay, what else do we have for you?
This is a nice story for Yorkshire, in that we up in Humber and Yorkshire are being flattered a little by the south. You'll have noticed that there has been some rain in the south of England, and the flooding down there has taken a lot of attention and it's clearly done a lot of damage. And I do feel very sorry for them. But we're experienced in this up here. We know all about it, and our firefighters and our fire and rescue services are very wise in the ways of managing this. And so a number of Humberside Fire and Rescue Service firefighters have been sent down to Berkshire to advise them, help them, lend a bit of manpower, of course, but just to give them the benefit of our experience up here of having the land covered with water.
And do you think it's good that the country kind of pulls together when, things like this happen?
Of course it is, absolutely. It'd be absolute madness if they were paddling around down there not knowing what to do. And we could have told, the expert firefighters of Humberside in Yorkshire could have told them what to do. No, of course, it's wonderful that we can go and. I mustn't take the credit, but that our experts can go and help. And
I mean, the thing is, though, with the tables turn, and obviously we've had horrendous flooding here at times. Do people from the south, do firefighters from the south come up to the north?
I think if we asked them and they said no, there would be some stern words. So presumably, yes, there's a national policy that, where possible, expertise and manpower and presumably equipment can be shared.
And we've got time for one last one then, Hugh.
One last story. This will have to be. This is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, or at least the Yorkshire Museum, which is going to be exhibiting next month a first folio of Shakespeare's. And there are very few of these still in existence. First published in 1623, the first collection of Shakespeare, published only, 7 years after his death, by his friends who got together. And remember, a famous introduction, they described him as having little Latin and less Greek, so not being a learned man, but writing this one, well, no reason to advertise Shakespeare, but the first folios, that this is being advertised here as the most important book in English literature, one of the very few remaining copies, and there are only around 230 surviving.
Do you know what, Hugh? I'm going to have to leave it there, unfortunately.
Okay.
But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Don't forget, if you have any stories or views that you would like to share with us, you can get in touch on phone on Grimsby 315561, on Facebook or Twitter at Estuary TV, or email us on news@estuary.tv. Hope you can join us again tomorrow. Until then, from all of us, goodbye.